Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for coming here tonight to hear author Tori Eldridge discuss her new book, Dance Among the Flames. Tori Eldridge is the national best-selling author and Anthony Lefty Academy Awards finalist of the Lily Wong mystery thriller series, The Ninja Daughter, The Ninja's Blade, and The Ninja Betrayed. Her shorter work appears in the inaugural reboot of Weird Tales magazine and horror dystopian and other literary anthologies. Her horror screenplay, The Gift, which inspired Dance Among the Flames, earned a semi-finalist spot for the Academy Nicol Fellowship. Before writing, Tori performed as an actress, singer, and dancer on Broadway, television, and film, and earned a 5th degree black belt in Toshindo.
I think the audience could probably provide that for you. We've got so many ninja in the audience, it's not even funny. But yes, Toshindo Ninja Martial Arts, you got it.
There you go. She's of Hawaiian, Chinese, and Norwegian descent and was born and raised in Honolulu, where she graduated from Foothill School with classmate President Barack Obama. Tori's deep interest in world culture and religions has prompted her to visit 9 countries, including Brazil.
Thank you so much. So I always think that's so funny to do a whole ninja bio presentation when everybody in the audience is a ninja. People are going to be tuning in and they're going to be saying, wow, can't they do the camera like this so we can see what ninja look like? And the answer is no, they're not. So the last time I was here, it was with the first Lily Wong mystery thriller, The Ninja Daughter. And that was, oh my gosh, you guys, that was so incredible. And then when The Ninja's Blade came out and The Ninja Betrayed, pandemic, and I wasn't able to be here in person, I was able to do virtual. So I'm so excited to be able to be back in person for this one here, Dance Among the Flames. And as you know, it's real different. It is just really different from the Lily Wong mystery thrillers. But the interesting thing is people are always asking me, hello, more ninja in the house. And no, you guys still don't get to see them. The thing that's really, really cool about this book, people say, oh, wow, it's such a departure from the Lily Wong mystery thrillers. And I say, yeah, except that this is the book that started my writing journey. So what happened was, it was back in the 1990s, the mid-1990s, and I had this idea for a screenplay. And in my mind, it was, it began on the Corcovado, and there was this thing, and this jumping off the edge, and it sent me into researching Brazil. And that's when I started to fall in love with Brazil. Now, that early screenplay, it didn't work at all. And so I had to toss that out. And I had to work on the one that actually got the semifinals for the Academy Nicol Fellowship. But to do that, I had to dive back into Brazil more deeply and find out what it was about this country, about this culture, that was fascinating me. What was it that was drawing me in? And it turned out to be the spiritualism. It was Umbanda, or as they call it in Bahia, Candomblé, or as some people call it, Macumba. And it is very similar to Santeria, but it was brought in, the Yoruba, the African Yoruba pantheon of gods and worship was brought in with the African slaves when they came into Brazil. And then it became intermingled with the indigenous Brazilian traditions and their ancestral worship and their animism. But as you can imagine, this didn't go over so well with the Portuguese slave masters. So they hid it and they secretized it with Catholicism. And so these gods and goddesses and spirits and ancestors were secretized to Catholic saints. And in that way, they could appear to be following the Catholic religion and yet still keeping their religion alive. And I think maybe what really attracted me to this has to do with my own upbringing and heritage, which was kind of interesting to me. So, as most of you know, I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Norwegian, and I'm from Honolulu. And my parents met and married in Japan. Whoa, there's 4, very diverse cultures right there that are very important to the family. And then, of course, I grew up in Hawaii, which has so many cultures. And I think that just living with that kind of influence made me very interested in learning about other cultures and wanting to know. When people came up to me when I was growing up and said, "What are you?" You go up to somebody, a person of color these days, and that question may not go over real well. But for me in Hawaii, it was like, "Oh, well, all right, so, you're going to get a history." And that would happen with a lot of our friends because our heritage was important to us. And really what we were saying is, yeah, you're probably some mix of Polynesian, Asian, Caucasian. I want to know what kind of mix. I want to know, what your culture is, what you brought to the island. So these things were very important to us. And so I was always very interested in that. But from a native Hawaiian point of view, our our ancient form of worship was rather similar to the indigenous Brazilians in that it was animistic. We were looking for spirits in inanimate objects and in nature and finding, these things. And it was also polytheistic. We had many gods, many goddesses. We had all sorts of rituals. And of course, when the missionaries came in, a lot of that was pushed down and wiped out for a bit. There were a few people keeping it alive, but not so much. And now there's a resurgence. So there was something about, I felt this great respect for the African slaves to be able to keep up their religion in the face of all of this, to be able to blend it in with the indigenous Brazilians and even blend it in with the Portuguese Catholicism and hide it under there enough that they could keep it going. And that struck a chord with me. And the other thing that struck a chord with me were the gods and the goddesses that I was starting to meet, and the fact that this is a kind of, I say a spiritualism because there's mediums that are channeling gods and goddesses so that worshipers can, communicate and get guidance and get comfort one-on-one without that intermediary of a minister or a priest, right? So there was something immediate and tangible about that. And at that time in the 90s, I also knew many people who channeled spirits, my sister included. So whether one believes it or not, I had actually had opportunities to speak through channels to, a variety of spirits. And that was a very interesting experience. I remember one channel, I had this tremendous experience and this wisdom passed on, and it was quite empowering. And so I asked her afterwards, but is it real? Am I really speaking to a spirit? Am I speaking into a past life? Come on. And she said, did you gain something of value? Did you gain some information, some wisdom, some form of empowerment? And I said, I didn't. And she said, well, then does it matter? And I went, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And I never really worried about it since then. It was more about the interaction. What did I gain from that? What resonated with me? Kind of like advice in general in life, right? If it resonates with you, you kind of keep it. If it doesn't, you kind of, maybe not. So I found the same sort of thing. So that also attracted me to the whole Umbanda, Candomblé, Macumba religions. I found that very fascinating and very timely for me at that time. And then there were these gods and these goddesses, and oh my goodness. When I started writing this story, I suppose I should tell you, is about Serafina Olegario. And Serafina, we meet her at 16, and she's rising from the slums of the Tainjeros Inlet. She's coming from abject poverty, and she is a young mother with an infant. And this is no spoiler, this is happening right in the beginning. She's bringing this infant to meet her politician lover. You can imagine that's going to be a rough meeting. All right, and so we're going to follow this story over 40 years, 3 continents, and a past life in 1560 France. The scope is tremendous. And in the course of this book, you're taking this journey with this character as she changes, as she learns, as she makes choices, some of which you may agree with, some of which may frighten you, some of which, it's going to be kind of the way that we meet people in real life. We get a first impression, we learn a little more about them, we learn a little more, and context changes, the person changes in life, our opinions of them change. And so that's part of the journey for me. That's part of the journey. And so when she first encounters these spirits, she finds out that the master of her head, that's the god or the goddess that is predominant in her character, is a goddess called Yanza. And Yanza is the queen of wind and rain. She is a warrior goddess. She is this masculine energy, this warrior, this empowerment. And whoa, I met Yanza and I went, oh boy, that's something. That's something. And then as I was researching more, I met another goddess named Yamanja. And she is the mother of all the Orisha, the spirits. And she's the goddess of the ocean, of the sea, and the mother, and the compassion. And that really struck a chord with my own Kuan Yin, goddess of compassion in the Asian pantheon of gods and mysticism. And I went, oh, wow. And so here's the thing, it's like the more I learned about what should be a very, very different culture and a very, very different religion, I found all this commonality with me in my own heritage and where I was from and things that I was investigating and things that were happening, right there in, the United States and with Western culture and Asian culture. And it all just resonated. And there's something about exploring the glorious distinctions of a new culture and also finding commonalities in there that I think makes it so wonderful to be an author and to be a reader, because we get to expand our awareness and we get to maybe try on new perceptions and reevaluate old thoughts about how we're looking at things. And so all of that was very important to me when I was writing this. But that all sounds so very empowering, doesn't it? This book is dark. I will tell you, it is dark. It has moments of searching for hope and these empowerments, but the story itself can be pretty wild and it can be pretty out there. And so I always like to warn my Lily Wong readers, Lily Wong was such an obvious heroine, easy to root for. You knew right from the start. With Serafina Olegario, you're not so sure. And your opinion of her and your ride with her may change, and that's part of the experience. And so that's something that I really enjoyed doing with this as well. So this started as inspired by a screenplay that I wrote. And at that time, people were reading it saying, oh, the prose, you should be writing a novel. And I was like, okay, let's do that. And so I expanded it and I loved it. I loved the process of writing a novel. It was so engulfing, to just be in those words. I mean, I think maybe being an actress, that really came in. I joke that I'm a method writer. I really dive into the character. I remember my husband could tell which character I was writing about based on my attitude and my mood. You know, and some of that was very nice, and some of it was kind of scary. And it would really change, and it was really kind of an interesting process getting through all that. And I went through the whole thing. I wrote it, and I edited it, and I polished it, and I was getting ready to send it out, and then I realized that there was something about, you know, the writing business. There was something about that. There was an actual business of writing, and I knew it existed, and I had zero interest in wanting to learn it, and even less interest in wanting to do it, because I had 2 little sons, and I had just discovered the martial arts, and we all know what happened with that. So 13 years later, and a 5th degree black belt and 2 adult sons, I was getting pulled back into writing fiction. Honestly, I never stopped wanting to write fiction. It was very sad. I hear about these authors who have so many ideas. They say, I'll never live long enough to write everything in my head. I was a writer with no ideas. I mean, this book, Dance Among the Flames, was so epic. It was so huge. The scope was so big. How was I ever going to think of anything else like that? And I kept, you know, waiting for some other inspiration to hit like that, and it didn't. And I just kept doing the martial arts and writing about empowerment and teaching about empowerment. Finally, 13 years later, I had an idea for another novel. Not this one. I started writing that. Three chapters in, I went, you know, I really should check what's in my closet. And I pulled it out and I went, whoa, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. But I was in a different headspace. Now I really wanted to have a career, and I wanted to have a long career. So it became the book on which I learned my craft. So I really started paying attention and learning about things and joining associations and learning about the craft and learning about the business at the same time. But the book, as you can imagine, it was so epic in nature that there were so many ways to tell it. There are a couple of you in here who read early versions or pieces of early versions. And when you read this, or some of you have read it already, you'll know it has changed considerably. Considerably. There were so many ways of telling this story. Structure-wise, there were different ways of structuring it. Point of view, there were different, whose story is this? Is it this character's? Is it all 3 of these characters? Is it this character? In what point of view? Closed third person, omniscient, first person? I tried everything. I tried them all. And every time I did, it was like, oh, this is it. You know, edit, submit, the whole thing. And then, I would get a feedback. I would get an epiphany, and I'd say, not quite. And the book never let me go. And while I was writing this, I started writing short stories. And one of those inspired The Ninja Daughter. And my agent at the time said, hey, you've got to stop writing this book. Not this book, a different one. She said, you've got to stop writing that one and write the Ninja book. And so I did. And then I set up the second Ninja book. And so it was like in between the writing of new books and the editing of new books and the promoting of new books, I would go back. And then one day, it hit me. It's Serafina's story. That's whose story it is. And once I landed on that, it all came together, and I had to write the whole thing again. And by that time, I got really serious, and I hired a developmental editor to make sure it was exactly saying what I wanted to say. And it was that manuscript that we submitted and became Dance Among the Flames. So this book has been with me for decades. These gods, these goddesses, this Serafino Olegario, and Michael Cross, and Adriana, and Giancarlo, and all these characters have been talking in my head and haunting me for all this time. And so I always tell people I am very grateful that it is now published and it can haunt all of you. And she can maybe let me rest a little bit because she is quite the force of nature. So that's that's kind of an overview of where I came with this. So I thought I could do one of two things. I could ask you for questions, or I could read a little bit of it. What would you like?
Should read a little bit.
Then I will read a little bit of it. All right. Just a little teaser. All right, so I figured I would start with the prologue. Always a good place to begin. Amour de Vieille Forêt, France, 1560. Echu crouched on the rocks, his sleek skin blending with the night, his golden eyes shining like stars, while below the young witch burned. Her screams pierced through the crackle and pop of exploding sap and the cries of indignant and horrified villagers who only a week before had believed Colette to be the sweetest, most beautiful girl in Amour de Vieille Forêt. How quickly they turned, all because of one lecherous priest. Echu shifted on the rock so he could sit on the edge and dangle his long black legs over the side. No one would see him, even in plain view, naked in a forest on a winter night. There was only one person in all of France who could see him uninvited, the boy. And even then, only in the form Echu had chosen to assume. But the boy was not looking up at the rocks. He was crying at the bound feet of the witch, the person he loved more than anyone in the world, the girl who was about to die. Reverend Pere d'Amboise thumped his staff on the wooden platform like an emperor on a stage, lording his power over the pitiful congregation. If they knew what kind of power Echu would bestow on him centuries in the future, his greedy heart would rejoice. So that kind of sets the tone for what's going to happen. And then it jumps to chapter 1. São Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, 1974. Serafina breathed in the salty air of São Salvador as her newborn Carlinho shuddered in his sleep. He had gorged himself on breast milk after humiliating her on the bus with his screams. Now he dozed in sweat-drenched peace. She wiped the milk drool from his jaundiced chin and smiled. How like a male to throw a fit, take his fill, then pass out, secure in the knowledge that a woman would clean up the mess. Serafina checked the traffic, then hurried away from the boats to the bustling Mercado Modelo, the famous banana yellow market where locals hawked their arts and crafts and tourists richer than her dined on Brazilian cuisine. Such a cheery evolution from the custom house that had stowed her ancestors as they came into port. Back then, the slavers had packed her people with crates of perfume and wine. Today went as planned. Serafina would buy a bottle of each. I'll just stop there. So that just kind of gives you... It's a fun one to read. When I write, I think this is where the singing background comes in and the music background. I think of music, and I think of cadence and rhythm and the sound and the crescendo and the decrescendo and the legato and the staccato. And so when I write out loud. I talk as I write, especially when I'm doing dialogue. I talk in character at myself. When I do the Lily Wong novels, I do the fight scenes. I choreograph them on myself, wherever seems appropriate. I didn't have to do too much of that in this book. There are a few fight scenes, but I didn't have to engage quite in that way. But I do like to speak aloud as I write, because I need to hear the sound of the words. I need to hear the sound of the language. There's a character in here, Adriana, and that name is so special to me. Whenever I hear someone say, "Oh, I love Adriana," I cringe a little, and I go, "Do you now?" And Adriana is special because I named her after a friend. when I was writing this back in the 90s and my kids were still small, our eldest son, his preschool teacher was named Adriana, and she was from Rio de Janeiro. And so when I was researching, back then it was in libraries and books and research rooms. I mean, maybe there was the internet, but I was a late adapter. I didn't know about it. I didn't know how to do it. So I was driving to libraries and doing all of that and talking to my friend Adriana. And one day I had been calling her and I couldn't get a hold of her. And all of a sudden she answered. She goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I haven't been able to answer. I'm packing. I'm going back home to Rio, stay with my family and everything. Oh, why don't you come?" And I went, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." So I go home and I tell my husband, tell, not ask. I tell him, "Hey, guess what? I get to go to Rio de Janeiro to go hang out with Adriana and her family. Could you take care of our 5-year-old son and our little baby?" He's like, "Sure." So in 10 days, I got a passport, I got a visa, I made my flights, I hopped on a plane, 14-hour trip for 3 nights in Rio de Janeiro. Boy, oh boy, was it worth it. At that point, if some of you are parents, you know, can you imagine 14 hours to yourself? I was in the middle section of the airplane. There was nobody next to me. I could lie down. I could order drinks from the flight attendants. I was all by myself for 14 hours. It was bliss. I was in heaven. I could have done that for 22 hours. But what was really cool was that I got to stay with her aunt in a particular neighborhood where we had to be careful and experience kind of this local vibe and this local life. And the thing that was interesting was everybody assumed that I was Brazilian. And that's when I realized how close, not just in culture and animism and worship, but also our look and our energy, coming from that kind of tropic environment. And also, there are a lot of cultures, there's a lot of mixed cultures in Rio de Janeiro, where I was. So even from the TSA to people on the streets, they were very surprised to see an American passport. And so I had studied up a little bit on Portuguese, as much as I could in 10 days. And I was trying to apply my 7 years of Spanish, to try and, figure it out a little bit. But so my friend Adriana said, "Okay, so when we're walking on the street, if I suddenly start speaking to you in Portuguese, you just nod, like you understand, and don't say anything." She says, "Because I'm not comfortable with who's around, and I don't want them to know that you're not Brazilian, because other than that, they just will assume you are." And so that was very interesting. And I got to go with her father. They were importing, exporting, and so I got to go in on some, very casual, business things, so to kind of get that local perspective. And then it was also during the semifinals match for the football team. The soccer, right? And that was really neat because we got to see it from a different cousin, a little bit more well off, on an apartment building up overlooking the streets. And I got to tell you, it was really interesting. The whole day, the whole city was decked out in green and yellow, the colors of Brazil. And the flyers, everybody was jazzed up about this. And when that game started, you didn't see a single car in the street. Nobody was out. Everybody was watching the game. And through the walls, you can hear the cheering and the groans of every move that's happening. It was astounding. It was this whole city unified by a football match. And then as soon as it was done, I look out, I don't know what floor we were on, the 10th or whatever, and I look out, maybe it was looking over at Ipanema, and then you start seeing the taxis, and then the cars, and the thing all started, picking up again. So I had this wonderful opportunity to see this city with locals and from that point of view, but then they also took me around as a tourist, so I got to see it that way too. It was the same way when I wrote The Ninja Betrayed. the third Lily Wong book that took Lily and Ma back to Hong Kong. My daughter-in-law is from Hong Kong. So when I went to Hong Kong, it was again with my daughter-in-law and her family and family banquet. And I met her popo and her aunts and her uncles and the whole thing. And there's something very magical to be able to see a place, especially a place you're writing about, with locals, because that's not something everybody gets to see. But it's really important to me because there's a visceral experience of Brazil. I remember driving in Rio de Janeiro is a trip and a half. The cars are teeny tiny. And that's a good thing because the lanes are really narrow and nobody seems to care much about those lines. So they're going wherever they want. So being in a little car is a very good thing. And there are all these buses and they're just spewing exhaust. And so the pollution is so overwhelming that sometimes you don't know whether it's better to roll down the window or to turn up the air conditioning, and you're kind of making yourself car sick while you're zipping around and it's a trip. It is a trip. And I remember driving up to the Corcovado. That's where the Christ Redeemer, the Cristo Redentor, the big statue of, Jesus, it's amazing. Oh my goodness, to stand beneath that. You're right there, about this high. And there it is. But driving up the Corcovado, if you get car sick, beware, because it is windy, and especially with all these drivers, if there are other people on the road, things like that, just these visceral things. I remember going by and seeing this pipe coming out of, there was this rock wall and just jungle, and out of something came a pipe and this water. And I remember Adriana saying, oh yeah, it's a great place to take a shower. And I'm thinking to myself, a great place to take a shower? Whoa, I may have to throw that in a book. What an interesting idea, that this thing would be there. And just, this is not something you see from Google Maps. But God bless Google Maps, because I was able to go all to the Pellegrino and South Salvador and the Coconut Coast and all these fabulous locations that were just incredible, and through, Ipanema and Copacabana. And also in this book are some of the iconic celebrations. Part of it happens during New Year's Eve, and there's this incredible light show that happens, right in the bay of Ipanema and Copacabana, and also Carnival, So there's all this spiritualism and mysticism and culture and celebration and all these things and some very dark things going on. Why dark? Because I was talking about how empowering, right, Umbanda, Candomblé is. Well, don't you know, there's a dark side, and that's called Quimbanda. And that has to do with Eshu, who you heard about, the immortal trickster, Eshu of the crossroads, the master of magic, and many other gods and goddesses who kind of work in there. But when you think of maybe similar to voodoo, right? When you're doing a work of magic, that's what they call it, a trabalho, a work of magic. When you're doing a work of magic with Quimbanda, it's for your client, right? So it's more self-serving, right? Maybe you're not seeking wisdom in life or how to help people in general. It's you want something to go right in your life. You want something to go right in your business. You want something to go right in your romance. Well, when you think about that, what benefits one person in business may not benefit somebody else. In fact, you may even need the somebody else, their business to collapse, to be good for you. Or if you have your eye on somebody, romantically speaking, you may need, the interference to move aside so that you can have that relationship. So when magic starts to become self-serving, self-oriented, it can become a bit dark. And not always. There are many Quimbanda practitioners who are not working for darkness, who are working for good, but not always. And so that, to me, as an author, was very fascinating and really just brought in a lot of possibilities, because I like gray. I like the gray areas. I know a lot of wonderful people. And you know what? We don't always do the right things. Even the best of us. We don't always do the right things. We don't always make the right choices. And the worst of us don't always do the worst things. And sometimes make good choices that help people. All these stages of gray fascinate me. And all those little moments in between that color our perception. The old resentments, the old abuses that carry with us, that color how we look at something, where one person may look at it as one way and another person looks at it another, and the exact same thing happened. These things fascinate me. They interest me. And so that's something that I really wanted to look at this book. It dives into, because Serafina comes from poverty, you're looking at poverty and bigotry and colorism and classism and abuse, psychological, physical, domestic, emotional forms of abuse. But you're also looking at empowerment from many different sides. You're looking at love, romantic love, familial love, parental love, and the potential corruption of that. You know, how things can change in these perceptions. So there's a lot going on. Some people have asked me, what do you hope readers take away from it? And I say, I hope it's something deeply personal, and maybe even something they don't want to share. And that would be fine. And that would be great. And so, gosh, that's an awful lot of things that I've been talking about. This one, it's not that thick, right? I mean, doesn't it sound like it ought to be, this volume? But that's what's going on in this book, and that's kind of what inspired me to write it and what captivated my attention for so many decades. So I don't know. Does anybody have a question or something you'd like to know more about? Or
Well, I have a question. You've had this story in your head for decades, and I know you've been working on it for so long. How did you get to the point where you decided you were done?
What a great idea. I thought it was done many times. I thought I was done in the 1990s. I thought I was done. Yeah. It's a funny thing. You get to a point where it's as good as you can make it, and it feels right, and your agent says, yes, I can submit this, and that feels done, right? And I remember getting some astounding feedback. Just some remarkable rejections, and some of them rave rejections, and some of them just really informative that would just spark an epiphany. I think I'm a marathon writer, so I didn't need this to be quick. Or I would have self-published, I suppose. I wouldn't have stuck with it this long. But so every time I got feedback like that, I would get excited, so excited, and I just have to dive back in and rework it. I remember there was one rewrite. I began by taking 35,000 words, cutting it out, and putting it in a folder. And that's how I began that one. There were some things that it was linear. There were some things where it had different timelines and it flipped back and forth. There was one version where it started here and the entire book was in flashbacks as needed. There were so many ways to tell it. But every time I thought I got it and edited it and polished it, and my agent was like, yes, and put it out there, I really believed that was done. And then there came that time where I went, it's Serafina's story. Whoa, that was like, that just made my hands spin around. That was an exorcist moment. Phew! And that's why I hired the developmental editor, because I truly wanted, to nail it then. Even then, when Running Wild Press picked it up, and my editor, Lisa Kastner, she had insights on it. I thought it started on this chapter, and she goes, no, it starts 3 chapters in. It starts there. And I went, oh, you are so right. So even then, after you get the book deal, there's still that. And then at some point, your editor the publisher's editor, that editor says, "We are done." Step away, woman. And you just gotta go, really, yes. And that's when you really know you're done. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
I love hearing about your process, and I'm so impressed that you stuck with it through all the, being willing to work on it so much. That's awesome. My question is, I know, writing is kind of magic, and sometimes you feel like you're choosing a project, and sometimes it feels like a character is choosing you, or kind of coming manifest and like knocking on your door and saying, you need to tell the story. And so, with Lily Wong, it was so easy to imagine, the connections between you, and with this, with Serafina, I'm just so, did it feel like, who was driving the bus?
That's a really, really good question. I joke with people that she's been haunting me, and the issue had a lot to do with, possessing this, creating this thing. Because, it was so long ago. I remember the seeds that led me to Brazil. I remember saying, okay, that silly idea wasn't going to work. For it to work, I have to really find what it is that's speaking to me about Brazil. I remember, and this has happened with a lot of different books. It even happened with the second Lily Wong book, The Ninja's Blade. I knew I wanted to do a deep dive into the commercial sex trafficking of youth in Los Angeles. And so what I did was I spent a couple of months researching that and listening to interviews and reading articles and reports and this and that and the other thing. And from that research appeared all of those teenage characters from whose viewpoint I could tell that story. And as I met them, then I found the plot. And that kind of process has happened repeatedly with each book. First comes the research, and from the research come characters, and from the characters comes a thread. So when I look back, and I've forgotten so much in my life, it boggles my mind, but I remember just researching the spiritualism for quite a long time. And from that started to come this character of Serafina, and the idea of channeling, and some of the other characters. There's a character who's from California who hears spirits, and so those sorts of things came in. And I'm not sure, because I don't remember how they all came together into this wild story, because it's pretty out there. It's wild. Sometimes I look back at there and I go, where did that come from? I don't know. And I think it's kind of like a breadcrumb. It just keeps leading you forward and forward and forward. You get a little bit of this character, and then that character, and then it goes to this, and then it goes to that, and before you know it, you're deep into crazy Tori's imagination. And that's just kind of how that one came out. But yeah, I still look back on it sometimes, and I just kind of go, whoa. I got to tell you, I was really relieved when Publishers Weekly came out very early with a starred review. And I breathed a really big sigh of relief, because this is a risky book. Not just risky coming from Lily Wong thrillers, but it's just risky. It's out there, and I thought, whoa, are people I know gonna be like, wow, I really thought Tori was this really nice person, and now I don't know, I'm kind of looking at her like, whoa, ooh, there's some sexy stuff in here. There's some really some wild things, and so it could still happen, but I've been relieved that people haven't come at me with pitchforks, so yay for that, so.
We see what happens when somebody comes at you with a pitchfork.
Well, that's true. I got the whole ninja thing. I can just go back on that, so maybe it'll be figurative and not literal. One can hope. Yeah.
So you talked about cutting out 35,000 words at one point. Is that another book, or is that just a process?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Sometimes writers bemoan the idea of cutting their babies. That's what we say. Oh, my editor wants me to cut out this chapter, but I love this chapter. So here's the thing. You don't have to really cut it and delete it and make it go away. You just cut it and you stick it in a folder. And so you can use it for something else. If there were to be another book, I could pull it out and use it for that. But here's the interesting thing. When I did that, it was somebody else's story. So part of what I put in that folder, I brought back. But then I rewrote. But so in all these renditions, I would be like taking out these things and moving these things and putting them out. And some things stayed out and some things came back. And then some things I thought came back and then I stuck them out there. I remember the beginning of this, chapter 1, actually, when I got this deal, the manuscript that the editor received was of Serafina giving birth. And I remember Lisa giving me a very good advice. She says, I don't think your book starts here because it makes it seem as though the book is about the son. She goes, I think your book starts on the bus. And I went, oh, you're right. But then I had so many things that were in that birthing scene and the scene that followed that were important, I felt, to the characters. So I found ways to drop those in to the scene. So either in a memory or something that's happening or, that's the beauty of a novel, right? You're in somebody's head and so they can remember and they can think something. And so I was able to take those bits that I felt were important and intrinsic to the character and pushing the story forward and taking it from those cut scenes and dropping it in to the first couple chapters. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. So now I don't worry so much about cutting babies. I don't worry about it.
Let's not take that out of context.
Yes. Please listen to what came before. That's true. Anyone else? I said so much, right? I pretty much said everything there was to say about this. Now you're all dying to read the book. You're kind of like, shut up, Tori, so I can just go home. Yeah.
So my question comes a little bit from asking a question of the artist, and that is, so you have played in many different artistic forms, and right now you basically told us you've come back to being a writer. One of the things that's become prevalent nowadays is that there's a lot of currency given to mashups and crossovers and all the rest of that jazz. And I'm curious from your perspective whether, as you think about your artistic goals and appetites and whatnot, whether this book phase is something where you plan to rest a while, or whether the book represents a way to reach into other artistic disciplines.
Well, that's really interesting. So the question is, I've worked in a lot of different art forms. Most of them have been performing arts. My sister is the fine artist. I'm more into the performing arts and the literary arts. And so the question is, now here I am in the literary arts, and do I feel as though I'm going to be merging into new art forms or resting here for a while? And it's a very valid question, because I do tend to change. I have upped and changed careers, sometimes on the climb. So when I left Broadway musicals, the last show that I did was the original company at the first national company of Cats. And so that was in 1985. And so that was a big deal, that show, right? So people in New York were like, what are you doing? And then I came out to Los Angeles, and then I was a series regular on the Love Boat, and I was doing some, motion capture and some other shows. And then when I said, I remember my husband, he was like, are you really? You're going to stop doing this? And I explored singing, because through all of this, I was a singer. And then I recorded with Brian Wilson. I was actually hired to go on tour with Michael Jackson, but then they called 2 days later and said, "Oh, sorry, Sheryl Crow. We're going to go with her and her team." And I went, "Sheryl who?" You know? After that, boy, I knew who that became. So there was singing and things, and I was like, oh, I kept finding I haven't quite hit it. I haven't quite hit the thing that is feeling, right. Teaching was always something that really fulfilled me. And so being a really involved parent, there was so much teaching in there. I taught music, and I co-taught vibes and drums and things like that. And that was very fulfilling to me. And of course the martial arts, and then I started teaching the martial arts. And then in between there with the writing and all of these things. So all of these, these art forms and teaching always, through all that thing. But here's the interesting thing about writing. I find myself using all these other arts are part of my process. When I was talking about being a method writer, that acting experience has been really, really important. Not just in storytelling, but trying to give distinctive voices in dialogue. I remember reading a lot of coverage from my husband, who's a producer. We'd get in a lot of screenplays back in the day. And I remember reading a lot of them. And it would always kind of irk me when everybody talked the same. They all spoke like the author. And I'm thinking to myself, well, no. And because I'm thinking from an actor's point of view. No, that they should be distinctive voices. And so when I'm writing, I find that acting part coming in. That's why I write aloud. And that's why I act things out when I write, because I need to get into those characters to figure out how they speak or how I believe they speak, so that, and they have their own rhythm and things. And then the music, the singing and the cadence. There's something about music and language that to me are the same. They're the same thing. And not just because of the lyrics, but because of the song, the musicality of it, the harmonies, I get very passionate when I talk about singing and prose. And then when you come into the dance, and that really ties into the martial arts, right? It's kind of two things. One is being able to feel the physicality of what you're writing and to try and relate that. But there's something else with dance. Dance is a form of storytelling. In any kind of dance, especially in modern dance, but in any kind of dance, it's a storytelling and connecting with that emotion and that passion. And I feel that very deeply with writing. And so what's been very neat about this, and so when you talk, will the writing spill into this? Because Dance Among the Flames, dance is in the title, but dance is also in the culture. And the reason why we started this event with a little samba lesson is because it feels entwined. I was just in New York, so I was there for a thriller writers conference called Thriller Fest. And while I was there, I reached out to a friend of mine with whom I did cants. And he is as close to the embodiment of the Eshu as anybody that I know. And I reached out to him because I knew he was still choreographing and teaching. And I said, read the book. And if you are so inspired, I would love it if you would choreograph something for you to dance, for you and someone else to dance, for you and I to dance, something, anything that inspires you. And he came back with an idea based on a possession scene between Serafina and Eshu. Whoa. And so, and I'm like, okay, don't break me, all right? You've been dancing, me, I don't know, I've been doing a lot of yoga. And so we met at a dance studio, and for about 3.5 hours, 4 hours, I had selected, 1 minute of this Brazilian percussion music, and he had this whole vision of this whole story based on a scene. And he would keep coming back, when I was too into the dance and and not, forgetting what to do. And he would say, remember the scene. Remember what you wrote. This is what was happening. This is what was feeling it. And it was, boy, I got to tell you, it was something. It was really something. And he surprised me by inviting another person that we did cats with to come and watch and give pointers. So it ended up being this fabulous reunion. And so I'll post that. But being able to have, start in New York as a 19-year-old dancer, and then now to have this book and to have my publisher pay for a digital billboard on Times Square in New York City, I was like, full circle. And then to come back to a Thriller Writers Conference and meet with my friends from Cats to do a dance inspired by a scene that I wrote in a book. This is very full circle. And so it just makes the whole thing just incredibly special and deep. But to answer to your question, I'm planning to keep writing for a while. I'm hoping to keep writing for a while. I've got a lot of ideas in my head. Yeah, finally, I have a lot of ideas in my head. I'm no longer that poor, pathetic writer who is, I really want to write and I have no ideas. So now I'm scrambling to keep up with the projects that I come up with. That was a great question. Thank you. And a very long answer. Oh, well. Anybody else have any other? Mm-hmm.
So I know we talked about this last time you were here, and the potential, or maybe it was online, I can't remember, but the potential for maybe a Lily Wong movie.
Oh.
And is there an update there? And have you thought about Dancing Among the Flames?
Oh, so yeah. So what's happening with TV, movie, things like that with Lily Wong and Dance Among the Flames? So, as you know, hubby is a TV film producer, so he does have the rights to these things, and he has been taking them out. And there are some people who are looking at Lily Wong. I think they are looking with television in mind. Whether that amounts to anything, I don't know. I mean, the road to publishing is long and so difficult, but when you compare that to the road to television or film, it is quick. It is so quick. I mean, it is astounding how long things can take. Yeah, the laughter in the back was from somebody who is married to a producer. And yes, it can take decades. It can take decades. And you think something's happening or something gets optioned and it falls through. So who knows with that? I will say that Dance Among the Flames seems to lend itself more to film than television, and it is with somebody very exciting. And so I don't know. I hope Serafina works a little magic for me, not to harm anybody, but just to kind of stoke the fires, and that would be amazing. That would be really quite something. That would be another full circle. It would be astounding to have a book inspired by a screenplay that then became adapted by another screenwriter into a film. Wouldn't that be a trip? I would find that just to be really something. So, I don't know. Fingers crossed. Anyone else? No? Okay, last call. Well, like I said, I've done a lot of talking, so I certainly have covered a lot of points. And I'm just, that Flyleaf Books is a very special bookstore to me because it's here in Chapel Hill. And Chapel Hill is very special to me because I used to travel here to train for seminars. I used to travel here to teach for seminars. Some of my dearest, closest ninja friend in the entire world are here in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill is ninja central to anybody who is not aware of that. That makes the whole triangle here probably the safest little area you could possibly be in. I always joke that we have ninja all over the world, thousands and thousands of us, and I know so many, and I don't know a single assassin. They're all people, like you, working for good and empowering others, and that just always makes me want to come back here, because this is a very special place. So here we go again. So many things get me emotional these days, but I'm so grateful that you came, and that you're here, and that you're sharing this with me, and it means so very much. So thank you all. Now I get to sit here and see when they're going to come and rescue me, and turn off the mic and unhook this. So I can't say anything bad. I have to be on my best behavior.